Cumberland's eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped in fear when he realized it was Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng's figure was flying near the ship and his body was surrounded by purple martial energy. Cumberland deactivated his powers, releasing Snowy. She fell to the ground, put her hand over her chest, and began gasping heavily. Cumberland's attention fixed on Lu Sheng and his eyes started to shine with hatred. He clenched his teeth and fist tightly. He knew that the appearance of the human figure was that of Lu Sheng, but the sensation it transmitted was not that of a real body, but rather an illusion. When thinking deeply, his eyes widened in fear, realizing that it was an avatar of spiritual energy of Lu Sheng. While he was distracted, the clone of Lu Sheng began to advance towards him with a serene gaze. Upon feeling the energy of the clone, Cumberland panicked, not knowing what to do. Just before Cumberland had time to react, the clone attacked with a fierce burst of energy, which struck directly against Cumberland's body. The attack was so powerful that the burst of energy left the ship and traveled hundreds of meters over the water. Lu Sheng's clone concentrated his martial energy into his fist and struck Cumberland in the chest. Seeing this, Cumberland's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. At that moment, Lu Sheng's attack caused Cumberland's soul to leave his body. The attention of all the martial saints focused on Cumberland's soul, and their eyes widened in terror, putting them on alert. They could not believe that with a single blow, Lu Sheng's spiritual energy clone had pulled Cumberland's soul out of his body, which was practically the same as being dead. Cumberland's soul began to ascend toward heaven. With a worried gaze, he begged the guide to save him. The guide started to gaze at the ground in silence, lost in thought. He decided not to stand idly by watching one of his subordinates die, so using his power, he moved one of his fingers. The guide's energy made Cumberland's soul stop ascending to heaven and start returning to its original body. Upon noticing that he was not going to die, Cumberland's eyes began to shine with joy. The soul of the martial saint entered back into his body, and he could not help but clench his fists tightly and feel relieved knowing that he had not died. He put his hand over his chest and his eyes widened in terror since he could not believe that his soul had returned to his body. The attention of the other martial saints was fixed on Lu Sheng's clone, and with faces full of fear, they began to retreat. Cumberland revealed that Lu Sheng's strength had increased again. Now he could even dominate the martial souls of life and death, so their so-called ninth-level divine bodies were nothing compared to Lu Sheng's power. Lu Sheng's clone clenched his fist and prepared to attack again. Cumberland hid behind the guide. The guide started looking at the ground, and thought it was no wonder that the ninth-level warriors of this planet were like toys for Lu Sheng. He couldn't help but praise him. While the body of Lu Sheng's clone was releasing martial energy, our boy's attention focused on the guide. With an arrogant smile, he asked if he was the guide everyone talked about. The guide did not even look him in the eyes and could not avoid feeling somewhat confused. The clone appeared in front of the guide, and while his eyes were shining with rage, he began to gather the power of the immortal cells in his fist and asked the guide to try to block his attack. The clone's fist began to emit a powerful martial energy, and when the guide raised his head, the fist was already centimeters away. Instead of panicking, the guide remained calm, raised his hand and decided it was time to get serious. Then, the guide touched the forehead of the clone with one finger, causing his energy to enter into his head. Upon feeling the energy of the guide, the eyes of the clone began to shine with confusion. The energy of the guide began to spin rapidly, forming a small tornado around them. The power of the guide was so strong that the bodies of the martial saints were thrown into the air. No one was able to withstand it. Lu Sheng's clone decided not to give up, and with a determined gaze began to strike with a chain of punches. With a calm expression using only one hand, the guide blocked the attacks of the clone. But the clone decided to attack by surprise, yet without much effort, the guide again blocked his attacks. The clone concentrated his martial power in his fist, causing martial fire to emerge from his body. Without losing another second, the clone attacked again with all his strength. But as expected, the guide did not have much difficulty blocking the punches. Now that the clone had his guard down, the guide decided to counterattack with a powerful punch. The clone's attention was fixed on the fist and his eyes widened in surprise. The guide struck the clone in the chest, making his body retreat several meters. The guide began to observe him, and with a smile mocked him by asking if this was all he had and advised him to surrender. The clone put his hand on his chest and with a confident smile revealed that he was just finishing warming up. At that moment, a tornado began to form in the middle of the yacht, and a powerful martial energy started to emerge from it. Not long after, Lu Sheng emerged from the tornado and began to advance towards the yacht. The attention of our boy was fixed on the guide and his eyes started to shine with seriousness. The image of when he was in front of the eye that was watching him from within the rift appeared in Lu Sheng's mind. Now he had no doubt that the guide was that being who had given Zhao Ji the deadly technique. The guide began to gaze towards the ground and did not say a single word. With a serious expression, Lu Sheng used his power and pulled Snowy out of the yacht. He began to stare at the guide and gave Snowy the order to flee first. With a serene gaze, he questioned whether the guide's objective was the energy crystals. Upon hearing this, a smile spread across the guide's face, revealing that Lu Sheng only had to give him 400 kilograms of energy crystals, and in exchange he would not kill him, and in that way Lu Sheng would continue being the only one at the top. While Lu Sheng's body was emitting a suffocating martial energy, he descended elegantly onto the yacht right in front of the guide. The guide and the others began to observe him in silence. The attention of the martial saints was fixed on the guide. The eyes of the martial saint who had a scar on his eye were filled with confusion, since he could not believe that the guide was not bothered by Lu Sheng's arrogant attitude. The guide had not said a single word about breaking the rules and moreover seemed to admire Lu Sheng. The other martial saint clenched his teeth and could not help but feel furious since now all of them were going to be eternally condemned to be inferior to Lu Sheng. With a calm gaze, Lu Sheng revealed that he had never been in the habit of being convinced with just a few words. He began to point at the guide with his finger, and with an arrogant expression said that if he managed to kill him, all of the energy crystals would be his. Upon hearing this, the eyes of the martial saints widened in surprise and their jaws dropped, while on the other side, Cumberland began to sweat like crazy. He started to observe Lu Sheng and his eyes expanded in fear, realizing that Lu Sheng was crazy. The very guide was being reasonable. He had even made concessions. Not only was he going to forgive Lu Sheng for what had happened, but also only wanted 400 kilograms of energy crystals, which was not even 10% of what the rules dictated. He was dumbfounded since the guide had made him a very generous offer, but still Lu Sheng was mocking him. Upon hearing Lu Sheng's words, the guide's eyes widened in surprise since no one had ever rejected his offer before. With a curious gaze, he asked if Lu Sheng was sure. Our boy began to stare at him intently with a confident expression and could not help but smile. Lu Sheng closed his eyes, and with an arrogant expression asked if the guide's martial art was that of a baby. He could not believe that even for fighting he was so fearful. The guide's attention fixed on Lu Sheng and his eyes widened in confusion, leaving him in shock. Lu Sheng continued mocking him and asked if he practiced martial arts for fools. The voice of our boy spread everywhere. The guide began to lose control and the yacht started to shake. Our boy called him a fool and his words were like a stone falling on his head. The guide began to gaze towards the ground in silence, not knowing what to do. The martial saints began to move away and their faces were filled with sweat and fear since they could not believe that Lu Sheng had dared to insult the people from a culturally inferior planet. It was like insulting a divine figure, and even so Lu Sheng pointed at the guide and called him a fool. The guide clenched his teeth tightly, and while his body was releasing a suffocating energy, he made it clear that he was no fool. He was so furious that he clenched his fists and veins began to form all over his body. Somewhere else on the planet there was a volcano. The power of the guide caused that volcano to erupt. Somewhere else there were two men fishing in the sea. The sky filled with black clouds and it started to thunder. The attention of the men fixed on them and their eyes filled with confusion. Without hesitating for a second, the two men knelt down and with their bodies trembling, they began to beg for mercy. Believing that the Sea Dragon King had become angry, they decided to plead for it to be calmed. Cumberland's attention was fixed on the clouds and his jaw dropped in fear. He knew that a level 9 warrior could communicate with heaven and earth, but causing such a vast change in the natural order with just one thought was impossible. He knew that this already surpassed the level of a powerful being from a single planet, realizing that the guide had reached stellar level. Snowy, who was moving away from the yacht, placed her hand over her chest and began to observe the thunder. Her eyes filled with worry as she did not know if Lu Sheng would be all right. The guide extended his hands and began to fly, causing his body to start releasing an intense evil energy. The martial saints went into shock, while Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with joy. With an arrogant smile, he once again called the guide a fool and asked if that was all. The guide started staring at Lu Sheng, and with a furious gaze made it clear that a fool like him deserved to be punished. Using all his power, the guide moved like thunder and in the blink of an eye appeared in front of Lu Sheng. Instead of panicking, our boy remained calm. The guide stood in front of Lu Sheng and began to concentrate his power in his fingers. Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on his fingers, and his mind filled with confusion since he did not know what the guide had in mind. The guide moved quickly and struck Lu Sheng hard in the chest with the technique called impact. Upon feeling this, Lu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. The guide's evil energy began to enter Lu Sheng's body, expelling his martial energy. His eyes turned white and he began to scream in agony. The martial saints began to observe Lu Sheng closely and could not help but sweat when they realized that this was the power of a level 10 warrior. Even the pinnacle of the human world, Lu Sheng, under the guide's power, did not have the slightest chance to resist. They thought he was going to be crushed in an instant and reduced to a mass of flesh. While the guide's hand was releasing an intense energy with a furious expression, he called Lu Sheng foolish and revealed that now he would understand the difference in power between them. The guide's energy entered Lu Sheng's body, burning him as if he were coal. Lu Sheng began to observe the guide, and while his eyes were shining with confidence, he started smiling, let out a sigh, praised the guide and mocked him by saying that now he was starting to believe that he wasn't weak after all. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Lu Sheng's body was scorched and it began to emit smoke. The guide started to observe our boy in silence, not knowing if he was really dead, while his eyes were shining with malice. Lu Sheng used his power and his scorched skin began to peel off from his body. With a smile, he mocked the guide, saying that his massage technique wasn't bad. He couldn't believe that the guide was so weak. The scorched skin peeled off from his body. He began to stare at the guide with an arrogant expression, and with a smile he mocked him again, revealing that his technique was too weak to harm him. Lu Sheng focused, clenched his fists, and while his eyes were shining, all the martial energies began to emerge from his body like a whirlwind. Lu Sheng's energy began to expand in all directions. The guide put his hand in front of his face and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused, not knowing what was happening. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with excitement, gaining momentum. He started moving towards the guide and with a joyful gaze decided to show this guy what pain really meant. The guide's attention was fixed on our boy and his jaw dropped in surprise. He couldn't believe that one of his most powerful attacks hadn't left even a single scratch, while he was distracted trying to understand what was happening. In an instant, our boy appeared in front of the guide. He clenched his fists and began to concentrate the power of the immortal cells into his fists. His eyes began to shine with excitement. With a smile, he decided to show this being from another world the power of a native from the blue planet. Lu Sheng once again concentrated all his power into his fist and used a technique called star power, causing a powerful martial energy to begin emerging from it. Upon feeling this power, the guide, who was considered one of the most powerful beings in the universe, gritted his teeth and couldn't help but feel fear, as it had been a long time since he had seen someone so powerful. The guide decided not to stand idly and be humiliated by a Lu Sheng struck forcefully, but just before his fist could connect, the guide used his power, making a powerful barrier appear around his body. But to his surprise, Lu Sheng was not going to give up so easily. Our boy struck again, and this time cracks began to form in the guide's shield. Now that his defenses had weakened, Lu Sheng took advantage of this opportunity to attack with a fierce punch, which landed perfectly on the guide's chest without even giving him a chance to react. Lu Sheng focused and attacked with a burst of energy. The attack was so powerful that the guide's body shot backward like a missile. Even though Lu Sheng's attack was powerful, it had barely scratched the guide. His body began to tremble. He clenched his fists and felt confused since, according to him, there was no way a native of this planet could have so much power. Liu Sheng clenched his fists, and while golden energy was emerging from his body, he began to smile because for him this sensation was very pleasant. He had completely ignited the flame of divinity, which was now burning his 364 immortal cells. This power couldn't even be controlled by himself. He was happy because he had been waiting too long for this battle. Our boy moved like thunder and began to advance towards the guide, and his eyes started to shine with excitement. For him, the most painful thing in the world was loneliness at the top, since he had no rival on this planet. With a pleasant smile, Lu Sheng began to attack with a chain of punches. The attacks began to successfully connect against the guide's body, but instead of feeling pain, an evil smile spread across his face. Lu Sheng made it clear that no matter how strong a warrior was, one always needed to find a good punching bag for fun. The fists of the guide and Lu Sheng collided with each other, creating a powerful wave of energy, which began to spread throughout the yacht. The battle was so fierce that the eyes of the martial saints widened in fear, as they had never before seen such a powerful impact. Cumberland's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng, and his eyes widened in surprise, and his jaw dropped. He could not believe that our boy had even managed to subdue the guide. He finally realized that what Lu Sheng had used against them had not been even half of his real power. The eyes of the martial saint Zhang Yu filled with fear, and he could not help but sweat, realizing that Lu Sheng's power had already surpassed the limits of their imagination. Any strike from Lu Sheng could kill them. The guide clenched his teeth and felt furious upon seeing that Lu Sheng thought he was a punching bag, so he asked our boy not to get so arrogant. Consumed by rage, he extended his hands, and a powerful burst of energy emerged from his body, repelling Lu Sheng. Our boy stepped back and landed in the water. The guide's attention fixed on him, and he couldn't help but clench his fists. Despite being a powerful warrior, the guide began to pant heavily. He knew that was not a level 10 warrior, not even level 9. He knew that he had barely reached the limit of level 8. So he revealed that Lu Sheng was a transcendental being. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with confusion. He started observing the guide in silence, not knowing what this guy was talking about. The attention of the martial saints fixed on our boy, and their eyes widened in surprise. They could not believe that Lu Sheng was only a level 8 warrior. According to them, this was absurd since there was no way for him to be a transcendental being. With a demonic smile, the guide began to imagine a powerful warrior. According to him, Lu Sheng had a transcendental vital constitution, since there was no other way for an 8th-level warrior to have such terrifying power. You would never have thought that on a small resource planet, such a valuable talent, like a stellar jewel, would be born. Lu Sheng stood up and with a curious expression asked what a transcendental constitution was. The guide began to gaze at the ground in silence, sinking in his thoughts. Then, he extended his hand and with a smile mentioned that a transcendental constitution was an evolution of the innate level of life, a genetic sublimation, a supreme treasure granted by the universe, and the stars. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with confusion. He knew that this guy wasn't saying anything serious, or was saying something equivalent to nothing at all, but more or less he could guess that he was referring to his inextinguishable stellar body. While the wind was blowing, a smile spread across Lu Sheng's face. He knew that the moment the inextinguishable stellar body had been born, his level of life had already evolved. He clenched his fists since he had completely crossed over to another level, and furthermore the immortal cauldrons continued raising that new level. The guide's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng. With a confident smile he realized why he had achieved so much. From the beginning, Lu Sheng did not belong to this planet. He was destined to go to the stars. The guide began to gaze toward the ground, extended his hand toward Lu Sheng, and a smile spread across his face. He no longer wanted the energy crystals, so he decided to let Lu Sheng keep them in exchange for coming with him. With a confused gaze, Lu Sheng asked where they were going to go. The guide extended his hand and began to think in silence. Lu Sheng felt furious since his intention to fight to the death against the guide had completely disappeared, and he had just started to warm up. With a kind smile, the guide extended his hands and revealed that they were going to go to a much broader world. This planet was suppressing Lu Sheng's power, and it could not contain him. He knew that Lu Sheng had dreamed of the Sea of Stars. Just before the guide could finish speaking, Liu Sheng interrupted him and said that they could talk about that after the fight was over. Upon hearing this, the guide's eyes widened in surprise. While Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with excitement, he clenched his fist and began to concentrate his power into it. What he wanted most now was to fight the guide seriously. The guide was an intelligent being. With a smile, he realized that what Lu Sheng lacked was pressure. Using his power, the guide began to fly, remembering that the foundation of a transcendental vital constitution was too profound. Millions of times more than that of a normal person, the higher one rose, the harder it became to advance. Lu Sheng needed pressure to stimulate himself. This planet couldn't even give him the necessary pressure to break through level 9. Our boy's attention was fixed on him, and he became curious. The guide extended his hands and decided to give Lu Sheng that pressure. Along with those energy crystals he had given him as a gift, now Lu Sheng owed him a favor, and would have to return them in the future. A magic circle appeared under the guide's feet, and at that moment, she revealed her true form. She asked our boy to remember her name, Lan Chen. With elegance, she descended onto while her eyes were shining with tranquility. She began observing our boy and apologized for having made him wait. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with confusion, realizing that after transforming, this guide named Lan Chen really did seem like a complete sissy. With a serene gaze, she began to point to one side and energy started to emerge from her finger. While she was observing the energy, she asked our boy to be careful since now she was going to show him the true strength of instead of feeling fear. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with excitement. With a confident expression, he told her to try her best to hit him until he died if she could. Lu Sheng started running toward her, but Lan Chen extended her hand toward Lu Sheng and from it began to emerge a powerful wave of energy. Upon seeing this power, Lu Sheng's eyes widened in fear, leaving him in shock. The wave of energy reached our boy. He put his hands in front of his chest to avoid being. Lu Sheng raised his head and began staring at her silently. At that moment, Lu Sheng's body completely transformed. His eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't believe that this was him. With a joyful gaze, Lu Sheng began to observe his hands. She had only lightly touched him with a finger. But that single touch had immediately condensed an enormous amount of energy from the heavens and the earth. The sensation he now felt was completely different from the way a level 9 martial master grasped power and unleashed it through strikes. It was something much more solid and heavy. Lu Sheng clenched his fist and his eyes filled with confidence, realizing that the difference in mastery and technique was not just 100 times more skillful. This was inheritance and also true essence of level 10. Lu Sheng began to smile and sank into his thoughts. While his eyes were shining with joy and excitement, he made it clear that this kind of direct confrontation was his favorite. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, while Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with excitement, he gained momentum and began to advance toward Lan Chen, ready to attack. Lan Chen decided not to stand idly by, and while her eyes were shining with calmness, she also began to advance toward Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng's and Lan Chen's fists collided with each other and their energy began to clash, creating a powerful wave of energy. They began to fight with fierce punches, creating curtains of smoke with each impact. This was a fight between two true martial artists with a combat power of level 10. Even a level 9 martial saint could not get even half a step closer. The eyes of Cumberland and the martial saints widened in surprise, since no one had ever seen such a fierce battle before. The fists of Lan Chen and Lu Sheng clashed again, and the impact generated a wave of energy. The energy turned into an explosion which began to devastate everything in its path. Lu Sheng jumped and his eyes began to shine with happiness. For him this fight was very liberating, as he had never before experienced such a pleasurable martial confrontation. Lu Sheng focused and decided to use the power of the immortal cells, causing a powerful energy to begin emerging from his body. As a reward, he asked her to please enjoy the ancient martial arts, level 11 boxing. Lu Sheng used the 5 stages of boxing and his body released an enormous amount of martial energy. Lan Cheng, who was flying nearby, began to observe our boy and realized that this was a technique from the 5 realms. Her eyes widened in surprise as she could not believe that Lu Sheng possessed such an advanced martial technique. Realizing that this truly was a treasure, and coming to the Blue Star had totally been worth it. She counterattacked and their energies collided with each other. The impact was so great that it could be felt from every corner of the planet. The battle continued, and although Lu Sheng had not yet fully mastered the level 11 martial inheritance, he could already unleash a power capable of destroying heaven and earth. The battle was so fierce that hundreds of kilometers around the sea turned into a true hell. On the coast of Binhai was snowy, her attention fixed on the energy emerging from the battle. She put her hands in front of her face and couldn't help but go into shock. Her eyes began to shine with worry as she didn't know if Lu Sheng was going to be okay. With a gaze full of determination, she decided to go help, but just before she could take a step, someone placed a hand on her shoulder. Upon feeling this, her eyes widened in confusion. It was Zheng Yu. She began to stare at Snowy with a serious expression and asked if she didn't value her own life, revealing that even they, the martial saints, did not dare approach that battlefield. Snowy began to observe her in silence, and then with a gaze full of determination, she asked Zheng Yu not to try to stop her since she wanted to accompany Lu Sheng, even if it meant dying. Upon hearing this, Zheng Yu closed her eyes and couldn't help but smile. Snowy's attention fixed on her and she felt confused. With a serene expression, Zheng Yu mentioned that she now understood why Lu Sheng had set his sights on her. She asked her to stay calm since Lu Sheng was going to be fine as he and the guy were actually reaching an agreement, Lu Sheng's breakthrough. According to her, interrupting the combat was not the best option. While the bodies of Lu Sheng and Lan Cheng were surrounded by martial energy, they attacked each other again. While Snowy and Zheng Yu were conversing, several men descended from the sky and one of them mentioned that she was right. These men were Cumberland and the martial saints. Cumberland put his arms behind his back and with a sincere gaze revealed that Lu Sheng had already been recognized by Lord Guide. Now they could only wait here. Cumberland's eyes began to shine with seriousness when he revealed that they had to wait for the appearance of the King of the Blue Star. Upon hearing this, Snowy put her hands on her chest and turned towards them. Her eyes began to shine with confusion, since she could not believe that Lu Sheng was going to become the King of the Blue Star. Back in the fight, Lu Sheng and Lan Cheng distanced themselves from each other. While Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with excitement, with a smile he prepared to attack again, since for him this fight felt great. Just then the guide returned to his male form. He put his hand in front of our boy, and with a serious expression said it was better to stop, and asked our boy to look around. If they kept fighting, the flow of heaven and earth, along with the energy of the universe in this region would become completely out of control, which could also damage the planet. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng decided not to attack. With a smile, the guide mentioned that an ordinary planet could not withstand power above level 10, and he knew that our boy did not want his planet to suffer damage. While Lu Sheng's body was releasing blue energy, with a sincere gaze he thought that the guide was right, since he was not going to be able to achieve his breakthrough on the Blue Star. The guide began observing our boy and with a smile praised him, revealing that a martial artist like him was destined to belong on the battlefield, and among the stars. He asked if Lu Sheng wanted to go with him. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's attention fixed on him, and our boy began observing him silently without knowing what to say. With a curious gaze, he asked why the guide was in such a hurry. The guide approached him, and with a sincere tone made it clear that Lu Sheng was an extraordinary form of life, and making progress was much more difficult for him than for others. This planet hadn't even allowed him to surpass level 9, so there was no way he could advance further. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng became somewhat confused. The guide handed him an item and said that if he wanted to enjoy a few more years of peaceful life, he could do so. Lu Sheng grabbed the item and his attention focused on it. This item was a communicator. With a smile, the guide decided to give Lu Sheng the time he needed. When he felt ready, he only had to use the communicator to contact him. This was a communicator with a maximum range of 200 light years, so he asked our boy to be careful not to break it. Lu Sheng began to observe the guide, and with a curious gaze asked where he had gotten this communicator from, knowing that it was a spatial storage artifact. A smile spread across the guide's face. Realizing that Lu Sheng was smarter than he seemed, he began to show a golden bracelet, and asked our boy not to think about taking it off, revealing that on their planet there were already several level 9 individuals with similar artifacts. A burst of energy appeared around his body. The guide decided not to waste any more time, and asked him not to forget to contact him in 10 years. A spaceship appeared and began to abduct the guide's body. According to him, it would have been better if in 10 years, Lu Sheng had reached level 9 before contacting him. He also revealed that next time he would not be able to give Lu Sheng his share of the energy crystals, since he also had to report to his superiors. Now Lu Sheng owed him 3 favors. Lu Sheng began to observe the guide in silence, and while his eyes were shining with confusion, he could not help but wonder why he owed the guide 3 favors, since a moment ago they were only, but then he thought that the communicator also counted as a favor. With a cheerful gaze, Lu Sheng began to observe it, realizing that the guide was someone very stingy. Liu Sheng activated the communicator and the guide's hologram appeared. With a smile he asked if our boy had changed his mind and if he wanted him to turn around and come pick him up now. Upon seeing this, Lu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He let out a sigh and said that he just wanted to test if this thing was working properly. Lu Sheng deactivated the communicator, making the hologram disappear. The guide made it clear that if he exhausted the energy, he would have to wait 10 years patiently. He could try everything he wanted and was welcome to chat with him whenever he wished. The sky had changed. Lu Sheng's attention focused on it, realizing that this area was completely altered. He feared that with the planet's natural recovery capacity, this was going to take a long time to return to normal. Lu Sheng clenched his fists and his eyes began to shine, although this chaos was not a big deal for the planet itself. For the life forms that inhabited it, it was a total catastrophe. He did not know if the crisis described in the dream space referred simply to a star-level enemy that even he could not defeat, or an entity so powerful that it could really blow up a planet. Both scenarios meant the end of the world, but the level of power was not comparable at all. At that moment, the martial saints began to fly toward our boy. Upon feeling their energy, Lu Sheng turned around and realized they had already arrived. Cumberland and the other martial saints appeared. Snowy gave our boy a hug and asked if he was okay. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng began to smile and said that as she could see he was perfectly fine. Lu Sheng began to observe Zhenyu and with a surprised gaze mentioned that he had seen how she had surpassed the martial saint. Zhenyu put her hand on her chest, lowered her head before Lu Sheng and said that she had only done what she should. While Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with calmness, with a smile, he asked everyone for help to clean the battlefield, since this area needed to be restored to normal as soon as possible. Upon hearing this order, Cumberland and the others got into military formation and nodded their heads. Cumberland's eyes filled with fear and his attention was fixed on Lu Sheng. Only by approaching him had he been able to feel how terrifying his power was. With a worried gaze, Snowy asked if Lu Sheng was not going to return with her. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's attention focused on her, leaving him somewhat confused. His eyes began to shine with confidence, and with a smile he revealed that he was one step away from reaching the next level. The fight with the guide had left him a great lesson. He had to enter seclusion immediately to attempt the breakthrough. Snowy placed her hands over her chest and with a serene gaze decided to let him do what he wanted, but she asked him to take care of himself. With a sincere smile, Lu Sheng promised to do so. Lu Sheng began to observe Zhenyu with a serious gaze and revealed that he wanted to talk about the matter of surpassing the martial saint. Zhenyu's attention was fixed on him, and she couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised. While Lu Sheng's eyes were shining, he said that there was something he needed to ask her to do for him. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, with a lost expression, Lu Sheng began to bring his hand closer to Zhenyu. Our boy touched her forehead with his finger and little by little his energy began to enter her body. Upon feeling this, her eyes widened in surprise since she did not know what was happening. Lu Shang's energy entered her body and it began to point out several points across the entire planet, making a map appear. Upon seeing this, her eyes widened in confusion, leaving her in shock. With a serious gaze, Lu Shang revealed that this was the distribution map of all the energy crystals on the blue star. At the bottom were the deposits of the hidden mineral. Zheng Yu's attention was fixed on our boy with a surprised expression. She couldn't help but wonder if this map really marked where all the energy crystals were, realizing that there were also mineral deposits. Lu Shang approached her, and while his eyes were shining calmly, with a smile he asked if she could make some additional trips and help him collect as many energy crystals as possible. He promised to reward her by letting her keep a portion of the energy crystals. Upon hearing this, Zheng Yu began to ponder in silence. She struck her fist against her palm, bowed before Lu Shang, and with an expression full of determination swore not to betray Lu Shang's trust. Her eyes began to shine with curiosity. For her it was incredible that the blue planet had so many reserves of energy crystals. She did not know how Lu Shang knew this, since even the guide was unaware. With a confident gaze, she thought that if Lu Shang had entrusted her with such an important task, it must mean that he trusted her. With a sincere tone, she decided to set off. Without wasting another second, she jumped and plunged into the sea. Lu Shang began to watch her in silence. His eyes began to shine with calmness. He knew that soon he would leave the blue planet, and by sharing the maps of the energy crystals and of the myth iron, Mytoro and myth silver deposits, he supposed it would benefit the whole planet. With a smile, our boy passed by Snowy and began to whisper. Upon hearing this, her eyes began to shine with love, making her blush like a tomato. Our boy grabbed Snowy by the shoulder, and while his eyes were shining with joy, with a sincere smile he asked her to go first since he was going to catch up later. Not long after, our boy also jumped and plunged into the sea. Snowy put her hands on her chest and began to watch our boy in silence. Snowy's eyes began to shine with love and she couldn't help but blush, realizing that Lu Shang really was becoming stronger. At the same time, 10,000 meters under the sea, there was Lu Shang. Our boy sat down and began to meditate, causing a powerful wave of martial energy to begin emerging from his body. Our boy extended his hand and energy began to form in it. Lu Shang's attention focused on it and his eyes widened with curiosity. Compared to when he had not yet fought against Lan Chen, his strength had now doubled. The foundation of his advancement toward level 9 was now more solid than ever. If he reached level 9, he felt that his power would transform in a way that even he could not describe. Lu Shang grabbed his wrist, clenched his teeth tightly, and while his eyes were shining, energy began to emerge from his arm. His mental strength and martial body had already fused together. The next step was to infuse them with his martial will and then create a unique imprint of his martial path, a divine form. Lu Shang concentrated all that energy in his hand and clenched his fist tightly. Then he raised his fist, knowing that the true form of his power was about to be revealed. With a serene gaze, Lu Shang extended his hand and began to observe the energy. The path of perfect fullness was the foundation, and the other path served as support. The energy of Lu Shang caused a great hole to appear in the middle of the sea, and not long after, a powerful marine whirlpool began to form. The power of Lu Shang made the whirlpool shoot up into the sky, surrounded by his martial energy. The attention of Cumberland and the other martial saints was fixed on them. Their eyes widened in fear, and their jaws dropped in shock. The marine whirlwind created by Lu Shang reached the clouds. Cumberland began to observe it with a gaze full of fear, and it didn't take long for him to realize that heaven and earth were being dragged by a gigantic force. Realizing that someone was reaching level 9. Upon hearing this, the eyes of the martial saint behind him began to shine with rage. He clenched his teeth tightly, and with a furious gaze asked how it was possible that there was such an expansive energy when breaking through level 9. When he had ascended to the level of martial saint, he had only caused an anomaly within a radius of a few hundred meters. With a surprised gaze, Cumberland began to ponder in silence. With a gaze full of fear, he could not help but wonder if the one ascending to level 9 was Lu Shang. Upon hearing this, the attention of all the martial saints focused on Cumberland, and everyone was paralyzed with fear. Cumberland began to look at the ground and thought that it was best to clean up this place quickly since they had no right to get involved in these matters. Despite the fact that the Martial Saints were furious, they let out a sigh and accepted that they, the Martial Saints, had now become mere elite cleaners. At the same time, Lu Shang closed his eyes and concentrated, making his martial energy become more powerful. Lu Shang stood up and a powerful energy began to emerge from his body. He could feel that it was already here. Lu Shang focused even more and began to channel his energy. At that moment, the figure of a powerful demon appeared. He crossed his arms and began to observe our boy in silence. The energy of Lu Shang began to swirl around him, and upon looking closely, he noticed that the demon had disappeared. His eyes filled with confusion, since he did not know what was happening or where he had failed. He decided not to give up, clenched his fists, and while his eyes were shining with rage and determination, he decided to try again. But not long after, the energy that was emerging from his body disappeared again. Lu Shang's attention fixed on it and his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He could not believe that he had failed again. With a furious expression, he focused again and decided to try once more. The Saint Lu Shang continued trying tirelessly, and after several hours, our boy collapsed exhausted to the ground. He didn't know why this wasn't working, nor where the mistake was. Lu Shang's face was full of sweat and his eyes of fatigue. He let out a sigh and began to ponder in silence, trying to find the answer. Thinking calmly, Lu Shang's attention fixed on his hand and his eyes widened with fear and surprise. His martial mark, his martial form, everything was built according to his will, and yet it didn't work. The bottom of the sea was full of strange fish prowling around the area. During these days, the Saint Lu Shang had been constantly trying and reflecting. Lu Shang sat back down on the ground, closed his eyes and began to meditate. While a flow of energy was emerging from his body, Lu Shang concentrated even more, having reached the third level of the state of mental void. His mental activity surpassed hundreds of times that of an ordinary person. Lu Shang stood up, clenched his fists, and the image of the strongest opponents he had fought came to his mind. He began to reorganize and analyze everything he had learned, peeling layers like an onion in search of the origin of everything. Lu Shang opened his eyes, which began to shine with a murderous intent. He tightly clenched his fists and began to observe it with a joyful gaze. A smile spread across his face as he had finally understood it. Lu Shang began to imagine his martial path. In his perfect martial path he had included more and more martial paths, and increasingly powerful ones. The original structure could no longer cope. It was already near its limit, when the martial will transformed into a manifestation. That limit was completely broken, not even able to close the circle anymore. Lu Shang began to imagine himself holding a tray full of apples, and then a tray full of heavy watermelons. It was as if a plate that was originally meant to hold apples was now trying to hold watermelons. The apples could be supported by stacking them, but with watermelons the plate might collapse. With a curious gaze, Lu Shang began to look at his hand in silence. If he wanted to ascend to level 9 with the perfect martial path, he had to devise a much more solid and vast structure that could support all those paths that were about to transform. Lu Shang closed one eye and began touching his head with his hand. Deep down, it all came down to his foundations being too superficial, his accumulation not being sufficient, and yet he had an excessive ambition, so he didn't know how he could easily create an unprecedented path in history. Lu Shang focused, and several energies began to emerge from his body. Until now, he had already traveled and counted on the support of 3 level 11 techniques, and with numerous paths of level 7, 8, 9, and 10 as a base, it could be said that everything had flowed without obstacles. Lu Shang began to walk upstairs toward the heaven. Now was when he was really trying to forge his own path, and not just any path but an unparalleled one, conceived to surpass even level 11. Aiming at level 12 and 13, he did not know what to do. Just then someone asked him to go to the world of dreams. Upon hearing this, Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with rage and confusion, since he didn't know what was happening. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,